Robert Smalls was born on April 5th, 1839, on the Beaufort, South Carolina plantation of John McKee. Born enslaved, Smalls dreamed of one day living as a free man. For African Americans living in the 19th century United States, however, that dream seemed out of reach, too far from reality. From an early age, Smalls was keenly aware of the horrors of slavery, the whipping post, family separations, the hopelessness, the misery. As a teen, Smalls was rented out to another master and put to work near the docks of Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Working on and around steamships gave Smalls valuable experience, and after a short time, word began to spread. Young Robert Smalls had unusual skills. Few people could navigate a steamboat around the dangerous shallows and meandering waterways of Charleston Harbor better than Smalls. Robert Smalls' owner allowed him to keep a small portion of the money he earned from his work on the docks, and little as it was, Smalls saved every bit of it. Perhaps one day he could buy his freedom. But that time in Charleston brought the young Smalls an unexpected bonus, something more valuable than money. While working in Charleston, Smalls fell in love and eventually married an enslaved woman named Hannah. Robert and Hannah had 2 children. The call for freedom grew louder for Smalls, but no longer would freedom for himself be enough. In April 1861, South Carolina seceded from the Union, and the Confederate States of America was born. With the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, the Civil War between the states, was unavoidable. The Confederate States of America wasted no time in forcing Smalls to work on a Confederate steamship called the Planter. Along with a crew of enslaved African Americans, Smalls did just about every job on the ship, from mopping the decks to navigating. Smalls even piloted the steamboat. Smalls' great experience and skills were a great help to the Confederate cause. The Confederate cause, however, was not his cause. Peering out from the South Carolina coastline, Smalls could see the Union Navy warships as they blockaded Charleston. Smalls knew that if he could make it to that Union blockade, he'd be free. He needed an escape plan. Each time the Planter's captain passed through Confederate checkpoints, Robert Smalls carefully observed the hand signals he used. Perhaps this information could come in handy one day. Also handy was the fact that Confederate officers aboard the Planter trusted Smalls and the rest of the enslaved crew just enough to leave the Planter for short periods of time. After weeks of careful planning, plotting, strategizing, Smalls and the other enslaved crew members secretly sent word to nearby enslaved family members that the time for escape was nearing. Robert's wife, Hannah, anxiously awaited. One night, Confederate officers went ashore to attend a Confederate party. It promised to be a long night of drinking and dancing. It was time for Smalls and his crew to get their groove on too. Time to set their plan into motion. And wasting no time, Smalls put the captain's white gloves and wide-brimmed hat on and piloted the Planter away from the dock. A quick stop to pick up family members at a predetermined rendezvous point, and Smalls chugged the steamboat towards the Union blockade. There could be no turning back. The night air was thick with nervous anticipation and fear. Each person aboard the planter that night was fully aware of what being captured would bring. With this knowledge at the forefront of their minds, Robert, Hannah, and the others agreed to line the planter's hull with dynamite. If they were captured, they agreed to blow the planter up. They would never be enslaved again. Truly, a do-or-die situation. To reach the Union blockade and freedom, Smalls needed to steer the planter into a line of boats and maneuver through 4 Confederate checkpoints: Castle Pinckney, Fort Ripley, Fort Johnson, and finally, Fort Sumter. With nerves of steel, ignoring what had to have been a lump in his throat, Smalls mimicked the captain's hand signals and imitated the captain's walk as he paced the floor of the steamship's wheelhouse. Each time the Confederates gave the signal, all clear. Each time Smalls chugged the planter that much closer to freedom. After bluffing their way through the last checkpoint at Fort Sumter, Smalls broke from the Confederate line of boats. Seeing the planter had broken formation, Confederate gunners let loose. Too late. The planter was out of the range of the Confederates' blasting cannons. As Smalls neared the Union ships, his dream of freedom became nearer with each turn of the planter's paddle wheel. As they grew closer, Smalls and his crew watched as the Union warships lowered their guns and took aim, preparing to fire on the approaching Confederate steamboat. Realizing the Confederate flag still flew over their heads, Smalls and his crew of runaways feared the worst. Hannah quickly jumped into action, lowering the Confederate flag and replacing it with a white bed sheet. This would serve as their flag of surrender. The mad dash to the Union blockade had been a success. As shocked, bewildered, and awestruck Union officers shuffled aboard the planter, Smalls simply saluted and said, "I am delivering this war material, including these cannons, and I think Uncle Abraham Lincoln can put them to good use." Robert Smalls, his family, and the rest of the enslaved African Americans were finally free. Instantly, the news of Smalls' escape made him a hero to the North, and he was rewarded by a position in the United States Navy. After his outstanding action in the heat of battle, Smalls was elevated to Navy captain. After the Civil War ended, Robert Smalls returned home to South Carolina. And still a war hero, he ran and won a seat in the South Carolina state legislature, making laws for the state. As a state lawmaker, he helped create schools for all children. Some say this was the nation's first public school system. Robert Smalls was not finished yet. Years later, he moved to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. There, he ran and won a seat in the United States Congress. He served in the House of Representatives for several years before deciding to retire. He and his wife Hannah decided to return to South Carolina. They bought the plantation where Smalls was once enslaved and lived out their days owning the big house. One can only imagine what went through the mind of Robert Smalls as he looked over a plantation where he was once enslaved. One day, while relaxing on his porch, an elderly woman made her way through his gate, up his stairs, and to his front door. Smalls was shocked to see that the woman was the wife of his former slave master. It was Mrs. McKee. She was suffering from dementia and thought she still lived in the house. Robert Smalls showed that he had a heart full of forgiveness as he took Mrs. McKee in and allowed her to live out her days in her old room in the house. Robert Smalls' life had come full circle, and his incredible journey came to an end on February 23, 1915. The life of Robert Smalls can serve as a reminder that dreams can become reality.